Marrying my husband was my choice. So even if it was a poor judgment, the responsibility is mine. But everyone makes mistakes in their judgments. My name is Emily, a 33-year-old married woman with a son in elementary school. I work for a small to medium-sized company run by my Phil and my husband. I was supposed to become the wife of a company owner, yet they say it's rude to say I'm being made to work. I've been scolded by both my own parents and friends for being extravagant. However, in reality, I'm being overworked by my Phil, my husband, and their company. I was initially hired as an office worker. It was a company introduced to me when I was looking for a job after graduating from community college. Until I got married to my husband, they paid me a salary. But after I married, wished by my Phil and my husband to please become our DL, I was made to work without pay. Being a small company, most of the employees are either relatives of my Phil or friends of my husband, so there were many connections. I am entrusted with a multitude of tasks from office management to accounting and general affairs. I was also in charge of cleaning due to cost-cutting measures. Among the staff, James, a veteran, taught me. James is a distant relative of my Phil, but a kind person who helps me with my strenuous work.
I'm sorry I didn't tell you. You are desired as a bride, as a free laborer, just like the lady.
The lady refers to my mill. She was an elegant and gentle woman, one of my few allies. According to James, my mill was my Phil's cousin. Their parents arranged their marriage, but my mill was in a much more difficult position than I am. My son Robert is kind and worries about his mother's hard life. However, my husband, her son, was a carbon copy of my Phil. Arrogant and domineering, he never cared about his struggling mother. A man who doesn't take care of his own mother wouldn't take care of his wife either. In this company and at home, such justice prevailed. My mill was very kind to me. She helped me, chased by household chores and work. My Phil and my husband dumped heavy workloads on me and left the housework to me as well. When I was tired from work and served store-bought ready meals, they exploded in anger.
Emily is tired. I'll help, my mill would say.
But it was useless.
A DIL should naturally dedicate herself to her husband's family. You, stay out of it.
My mill tried her best to help me, but there was a limit. My husband lost interest in me when our son was born. He would be absent from home for days at a time, his whereabouts unknown. My Phil did the same. Yet, they berated my mill and me as useless.
A woman who can only bear one child is useless.
Robert doesn't look cute. He looks just like Emily. Is he really my child?
They don't realize how much their words can hurt others. I have been deeply hurt in my dignity by my Phil and my husband. I've been overloaded with various tasks since I got married, and my fatigue was at its limit. Thanks to my mill's support, I somehow managed not to collapse from overwork. Since I wasn't paid a salary, I couldn't even afford to buy clothes or get my hair done. My mill secretly gave me some money. She also shared some of her limited clothes and jewelry with me. She was skilled in both Western and Eastern traditional sewing, and she remade one of her precious clothes into a dress for me.
I can only do so much. I'm sorry, she would say.
The clothes she made with love were very beautiful. More than anything, I was happy with her warm feelings. Thank you, Mary, even though it was your precious clothes. As I cried and thanked her, Mary smiled at me. She had attended a sewing school during her youth, so she was skilled at needlework. Mary confided in me that she never wanted to marry my Phil, John. Being his cousin, she had always known his arrogant nature. But since the marriage was arranged by their parents, she had no way to oppose it. After marrying into the family, she was treated poorly and was unhappy. Even during her pregnancy, Mary was overworked by John. My fate was exactly the same. I was forced to work up until the last month of my pregnancy, and it would have been dangerous for both me and my child if Mary hadn't helped me. My husband, who feels no affection for our son Robert, never took part in childcare. Robert, in turn, never grew fond of his father and grandfather. He saw them as enemies, as they were harsh to his mother, me, and his grandmother. Robert always stayed by my side and his grandmother's during tough times. Despite his young age, he seemed aware that he was the only one who could protect his mother and grandmother. This didn't sit well with John and my husband. When Robert acted defiantly, John and my husband blamed me.
He doesn't respect his grandfather, and it's all because of your poor parenting.
It's your fault for not educating him properly. You're incompetent.
I was so frustrated that I almost cried. Wise beyond his years, Robert had already realized that his father and grandfather were despicable people. Though only 10, Robert spoke maturely and defended me and his grandmother logically when confronting John and his father.
You can't expect unconditional respect, not even from a father or grandfather who aren't worthy of it. Don't you understand that?
John and my husband were furious at Robert's words. They scolded him for being insolent, but Robert completely ignored them. John tried to win Robert over with a generous allowance, but it was in vain. It only made Robert despise them more. My husband tried to convince Robert of my and Mary's incompetence, but it backfired. When Robert told him, "It's despicable to insult your wife and mother like that," it was over. Robert once said to me when we were alone,
Mom, you should get a divorce. Staying in this house only brings unhappiness.
he was right, but it was impossible for me. I had complained about my harsh reality to my parents several times, but they only scolded me for not being patient enough and were not supportive. They told me not to complain since I married into a relatively wealthy family. So even if I divorced, I couldn't rely on my parents. And at 33, a woman who can only do office work and menial tasks had no hope. Above all, if I divorced, I risked losing custody of my dear Robert. He was considered the heir to the company. Mary would also be left behind in the house if I divorced. I could never leave my kind mill. I continued to endure the treatment from John and my husband. Robert and Mary worried about me as I grew increasingly frail each day. James, the only kind colleague, had to leave the company. His wife became seriously ill, and he needed to care for her. John fired him because it interfered with his work. James, who had dedicated many years to the company, was coldly deemed no longer necessary. He left with just a small severance package. After using people up, they were discarded when no longer needed. The company without James felt even more unwelcoming. I was so exhausted that I began to lose my will to live. It was during these dark times that a turning point in my life arrived. There was a school event for my son Robert, which included a classroom visit and a parent-teacher meeting. During the classroom visit, I watched Robert eagerly solve math problems. Other parents admired Robert's intelligence. Despite being my and my husband's son, Robert was like a hawk born from a kite. A woman sitting next by quietly spoke to me.
"You're Robert's mom, right? My son and Robert are good friends."
As I smiled weakly from fatigue, The woman's expression clouded. Worried I had offended her, another parent, a man, spoke in a low voice.
You look pale. You should sit down and join us from there.
The teacher smiled and nodded at the man's suggestion. I watched Robert from a chair, and he kept glancing back at me, worried. The other parents of Robert's classmates were all very kind. It had been a long time since anyone other than Robert and Mary had shown me kindness. After the classroom visit, there was a parent meeting. To my surprise, not only mothers but also fathers were present. Both John and my husband had always declared that childcare was a mother's responsibility. My own parents held similar views. However, in reality, childcare should be a collaborative effort. That day, there was a brief introduction by each parent. Everyone introduced themselves with a friendly smile. When it was my turn to introduce myself, I started to stand but felt dizzy. The man next to me, the man suggested I stay seated. The same one who had offered me a chair earlier.
I'm a doctor. Today, I left the clinic to my wife and came here.
He examined my expression briefly and then declared,
You're clearly suffering from lack of sleep and poor nutrition. You need to rest.
At his diagnosis, I burst into tears. When I said it was absolutely impossible for me to rest, the usually quiet teacher spoke up.
Actually, Robert has been consulting with me for a while. Today, we're going to change the agenda of this meeting.
All the parents agreed with the teacher's proposal. The teacher had been counseling Robert about the domineering attitudes of his grandfather John and father that he witnessed every day. Robert often complained about the harsh treatment his mother and grandmother Mary received.
We have to act fast, or it will be too late for my mom and grandma.
Robert had confided everything about our home situation to the teacher. The teacher trusted Robert's words and wanted to help. However, a teacher could not carelessly intervene in family issues. But seeing my current state, the teacher decided immediate action was necessary.
I'm sorry to intervene in your family matters, but Robert is asking for help. We cannot ignore a situation that threatens the well-being of a child.
The parents supported the teacher's firm stance. The doctor then spoke on behalf of the group, asking me,
Please tell us what you can about your struggles. There's definitely something we all can do to help.
I slowly began to share the painful realities of my marriage. The unpaid work at the company, the demand for perfect housekeeping, and being berated whenever I took a rest. I honestly spoke about the harsh reality that only Robert and Mary were on my side, and that I couldn't rely on my own parents. The teacher and the other parents were speechless at the unexpected severity of my situation. Tears came as I explained, and a woman nearby handed me a handkerchief. It was the same woman who had told me her son was good friends with Robert. As I cried, she gently patted my back, but spoke firmly.
You've endured a lot, but crying alone won't solve this. What do you want to do, Robert's mom? Please tell us what you really think.
Moved by her question, I spoke through my tears. I want a divorce. I can't stand this anymore. Living like this is unbearable. I want to take Robert and Mary and leave this house, I exclaimed. Then, the woman quietly nodded and pulled a business card from her purse. It was a card from a law firm. She and her husband worked as lawyers. Her son, having noticed Robert's situation, had discussed it with his parents. His friends sensed that Robert's home life was not good.
You can consult us via email if that suits you. We'll teach you how to keep it hidden from your husband. Our help is free of charge. It's just me being nosy,
she declared with a bright smile. The other parents watching also cheered me up. With Robert's help, I had gained a lot of supporters. To not worry my son further, I decided to pursue a divorce. From then on, I slowly started preparing for the divorce. When I told Robert, he said he would come with me. I also informed Mary that I was preparing for a divorce. Mary agreed immediately and even made a shocking statement.
I'll divorce too. I have no attachment to this house without Emily and Robert.
Thus, Mary and I were both preparing for our divorces. I was overwhelmingly favored for custody. According to the parents of Robert's friend, my husband, who did not contribute to childcare, was seen as incapable of raising a child despite his financial resources. I could file for child support, which made it possible for me to live with Robert. However, I would still need to work even if I could claim alimony. Without sufficient financial means, I would be deemed unfit to raise a child. It was also crucial to have time available for childcare. Neglecting the child for long hours would obviously be disadvantageous. With this in mind, I was looking for a job. Both Mary and I certainly had the right to divorce and claim alimony. Years of unpaid, strenuous work and verbal abuse that damaged our dignity. And the ultimate deal breaker was the betrayal by our spouses. Both John and my husband mistakenly thought their wives were submissive. They had not realized that they were actually holding their greatest weaknesses. Mary and I were energetically preparing for our divorces. Divorce preparation is said to be exhausting, but Mary and I were moving forward with enthusiasm, feeling happier than we had since our marriages. Mary and I had decided when we would announce our divorces. John's business was floundering. Bankruptcy was inevitable. John and my husband were irritable due to the company's financial difficulties. And I had someone providing me with information. It was James, who had been forced out of the company after his wife fell ill. James was nursing his wife while working at another company. He harbored resentment for being discarded by the company once deemed no longer useful. So he switched jobs to one that could bring ruin to John and my husband from behind the scenes. Basically, it was a company that offered loans. John, struggling significantly with cash flow, ended up borrowing from James' company. James kept me updated every step of the way. John was unable to see through James's intentions. He didn't realize that borrowing there would lead to huge interest accumulations.
It's likely going to be bankruptcy. The debt is substantial. They won't be able to pay any alimony.
And will collect mercilessly. Feel free to overwork John and your husband as they did to you. And then, the day we had all been waiting for finally came. John's company spectacularly went bankrupt. I had forewarned the other employees, so they had all escaped. Only the abandoned John and my husband remained. Seeing them, burdened with massive debts and in despair, was exhilarating. Mary, feeling similarly, was smiling. Both Mary and I intensified the despair of our husbands. We're getting a divorce. Here, sign the divorce papers.
Me too. I'm divorcing too, so please take care of this.
Presenting the divorce papers together, Mary and I watched as John and my husband were shocked. This was the moment Mary and I had been waiting for. We could retaliate against those who had caused us suffering at their most unfortunate time. John and my husband began to rage selfishly at our defiance.
Are you abandoning us?
Of course. After all, you never really saw me as your wife, did you? Just as John and my husband tried to shout back, Mary joined in without hesitation.
Moreover, you guys have been unfaithful, right? We know all about it, you fools.
With Mary's typically dignified demeanor, John and my husband were left speechless. Mary and I vented our pent-up frustrations, resentments, and anger, berating John and my husband. Then we forced them to sign and stamp the divorce papers and said without mercy, "Even if there's debt, you're paying the alimony and child support. Now, Mary, let's go. Robert is waiting."
Yes, indeed. Goodbye, strangers.
Leaving the stunned John and my husband behind, Mary and I briskly completed our divorces. Now a single mother, I live with Robert and Mary. I work at a law office introduced by the lawyer mom friend who had helped us, aiming to get my paralegal certification. As I work full-time, Mary helps with the household and childcare. Not only that, but she also puts her sewing skills to work at home. Her clothing alterations are highly popular. Robert has been doing well since the divorce. He plays happily with his friends. After the divorce, my parents apologized. They were sorry for not recognizing my difficult situation. They suggested I move back home, but I refused. I no longer considered my parents as allies. Life is more enjoyable living with Robert and Mary. I realized that parents are not necessarily allies. It's best not to have expectations. Those who truly reached out to help, aside from Robert and Mary, were not my relatives. Robert's teacher and the other parents. People who could have ignored me actively chose to help me. If it weren't for their efforts, Mary and I would still be in a harsh situation. I am truly grateful from the bottom of my heart. John and my husband have been demanded to repay their debts. James is actively collecting the payments, ensuring that the alimony and child support are paid without issues. On a day off from work, I had tea with a few parents from Robert's class. One of the moms shared. John had collapsed under the stress of his debts. My husband had planned to flee and put an end to his debts, but was stopped. Thanks to James, he is now working hard labor on a large ship. I don't know exactly what he does, but I thought he could work as much as he likes. And I hoped John would suffer as much as possible. When I returned home and told Mary about John and my husband's situation, she laughed without reservation.
I'm looking forward to the next alimony payment.
Despite John's collapse, Mary ruthlessly claimed the alimony. I'm busy working after obtaining my paralegal certification. Robert told me he thinks I'm cool. John is exhausted and has expressed a desire to see his grandson. Since it's up to Robert, I asked him if he wanted to meet John. Innocently, Robert smiled and said, "I'll go visit him." James took Robert to see John on my and Mary's behalf. Everything went smoothly, and Robert came home, but the next day John passed away. Neither Robert, Mary, nor I attended the funeral. It was questionable if anyone did attend. Out of distant kinship, James took care of the burial. When I called to thank him, James kindly responded,
Thanks to you, my wife is settling down too. Sorry for any trouble.
When I replied that it was great to hear, James chuckled. He praised Robert for being the best for visiting John. I believe gentle Robert had cheered up his bedridden grandfather. John must have been content to see his grandson's kind face at the end. Mary and I had believed this for years. However, when Robert entered high school, the truth came out. James had kept it a secret. There was no direct evidence linking Robert to John's death. Robert is a bright and caring boy, deeply cherishing Mary and me. But he had punished John, who had mistreated us. Of course, not physically, but psychologically. With a smile, Robert had plunged John into despair. Robert innocently joked with a smile.
Dad's ship has capsized.
Even though it was a complete lie and my husband was still paying off his debts on that ship. I scolded Robert for lying, a lesson that took years to impart. Robert swore never to do it again. He adhered to Mary's and my instruction and never again told a devastating lie. However, he absolutely refused to meet his father again. The greatest misfortune for my husband was more severe than the divorce or the debts. It was being deemed non-existent by his own son. Fortunately, he hasn't actually sunk, so I continue to claim child support.